Hello, my name is Spencer from Innerloop, and I am the game director for Rhythm Towers, which is a rhythm-based tower defense game coming out very soon. So the basic summary of Rhythm Towers is you are defending the idea of music, defending the idea of rhythm. And to do that, you build rhythm towers, which are defensive towers that use elements of music as weapons, effectively. So every time you build a tower, you're adding a new layer of music. So let's say you start with some drums, and the drums are effectively artillery towers, so they will fire projectiles. And then you can add things like support towers, being bass, add things like elemental towers, which are the melody. So as you're adding defenses to the world, you're also creating a very unique soundtrack that you'll be listening to while you're playing. So the enemies that you're up against, they don't like music, they don't like anything rhythmic, and you are effectively the protector of music and rhythm. So what we're about to see here is some gameplay that was from earlier in the year to kind of show the state of the game as it is at the moment. There's been a few changes since then. So this first part of the tutorial level is basically the manager just summarizing what some of the aspects of the level are. So for example, here is the algorithm, which is the part of the level that you're trying to protect. And then what you're looking at here is one of the stems, and this is where you build towers on. You effectively stand on one of these, do your dance moves and match some rhythms, and this is where you summon your towers. And this is a creep spawner, so this is where the enemies will be spawning from. So this first level is just a very simple way of just introducing the player to the basic level, the basic elements that make up the level, basic elements that make up the game, and just starting off with some very easy first towers to build. So this one here, the player is just doing a very simple little melody that starts off a little bass groove and builds up a resource tower. And what the resource tower does, it effectively spawns notes, which is your currency or your resource that you use to build towers while you're playing. And then the second tower that the player is building now is your first defensive tower, which is part of the drum group, and it's a fireball tower, this is the cannon, And this basically launches cannonballs at the enemy to stop them from getting from creep spawner up to the algorithm. So it will fire on cue with the music, so on each kick it will let off one of its little cannons and hopefully stop the enemies from getting through. Like so. And then alongside the resource tower, the creeps will also drop notes, which you can then collect to build your resources up and use that to either upgrade existing towers, which the player's about to do here. So as this tower already exists and it's been built, upgrading it now will make it a bit stronger, so it will deploy notes a lot faster. And as the player has added a new melody or a new groove, this is the bass part that takes over. So each time you build a tower, you effectively swap out that part of the music for something new, which keeps the soundtrack sounding different and interesting as you're playing through the level. And this time the player is going to build a fireball tower, which is slightly different from the cannon, where it will fire direct shots right at the enemy rather than doing this kind of area effect attack. It'll just hit one enemy at a time instead. And again, it just shows a basic example of the core gameplay loop, which is effectively collect resources, build towers, check out for new enemies, make sure you've got the defenses in place to stop them getting where they need to go, and basically rinse and repeat. So this tutorial level has now been complete. So this is just showing the process of capturing the motion for the dance moves. So I used to use a bit of a clunky motion capture suit that required a lot of cleanup, whereas now there's some very nice AI-powered, basically markerless motion capture tools, which you can now use to capture motion without having to, wear the suit with all the dots and do all of the tedious cleanup afterwards. So that's something that I've been experimenting with. So this is the very first prototype for the game. So there is a game engine for the PlayStation 4 called Dreams, which allows you to basically put together little mock-ups and very simple versions. So from this very early prototype, you can see things that are very reminiscent from the current game, where you choose a little spot to build on, choose a tower, and then start playing a little rhythm that will effectively A, build your tower, and B, contribute to the soundtrack that then starts playing. So this first tower has now been built. Let's just add a little bit of melody. And this time I'm going to add some drums. So each time you hit one of the buttons in time, it builds up this little meter to kind of show you how far you're doing now the tower's been built. Everything's still there. That's that very same concept. It's still there from the very beginning. It's just followed through by making it just look more visually appealing and adding some interesting music to it and a story and all that kind of stuff. So now that you've got the basics of how to play, the main level is up next. So this main level for the demo, as the manager is describing here, is going to be a bit more complicated than the last one. There's going to be a bit less hand-holding in terms of what you need to do. And there will be a lot more waves of enemies, and they'll be a bit different, and they will have different abilities and strengths and weaknesses that you'll have to learn to adapt to as you're playing. So the first things first is usually to just start building your defenses. So in this instance, starting off with, looks like a cannon. So the good thing about the cannon is it can hit multiple enemies at once. So once it fires off this cannonball, which any enemies that are caught in that range will all be damaged at the same time, like a good area of effect attack. And now that first tower has been built, the enemy waves will start appearing very soon. So what the player's doing now is creating a resource tower, which will again just give that steady supply of resources or notes that the player can then use to build new towers, upgrade towers. So once that's built, it will just start pumping out resources quite frequently. And you can actually build more than one of those. So one good strategy to have is to build a few of them at different parts of the level, so you've always got somewhere to collect resources. You're never going to run out of notes to build more towers. And yeah, so as I just mentioned, so building another resource tower near this one, just to make sure that there's always plenty of resources to go around. And each time one of these towers is built, as you're able to hear by the music, it's changing different parts. So when you already have a base groove going and you build another base tower, that will effectively change the base for the rest of that soundtrack. Or if you upgrade it, again, it changes it just to keep the music sounding fresh as you're playing. Oh, so yeah, the creep spawner that you should try to stay away from, because it will harm you and push you back, and sometimes even penalize you by dropping your notes. And upgrading the melody tower obviously changes the melody that's playing throughout the level. So again, one thing that to be aware of is just because certain enemies have been defeated in one wave, it does mean that as the waves progress, they will be stronger each time, or they'll be faster, or they'll have certain elemental resistances. So for example, there's certain enemies that are airborne, so the cannon won't actually do any damage to them. So what the player's doing here is they're building an anti-air tower, which will basically only attack air-based enemies. So you want to make sure that you have a good variety of different types of towers to make sure that you are able to defend against all the different types of enemies that you'll be coming across. And the manager below he's always trying to give you little hints about these kind of things. So as you'll see here, the creeps that have just come through now are big, bulking tank enemies, so they take a lot more damage to be defeated rather than the small, slow ones from the first couple of waves. And again, so sometimes you'll find that you're in a position where you need to build a certain tower, but you don't have the resources, so just always make sure that you're collecting enough notes to to make sure that you've always got enough to build the towers that you need. And the tower that's being built now is a fire tower or a flamethrower tower, which is something that you will unlock as you're playing through this first level. And then once you've built this, you'll hopefully be able to do a bit more damage, because when it sets enemies on fire, they will take damage over time, rather than just taking that one hit. And something else that's just happened in this level, there's a second creep spawner that has just opened up, which the manager is alerting you of. So rather than just having one place you need to be aware of for enemies coming, there's each level can have one or more of these creep spawners, so you always just need to be alert as to the path that the enemies will be taking, where they'll be coming from, and which direction they're heading. So there's getting to be quite an assortment of towers now, but as you can see, the second path is not as well defended, which is now why the player is adding a bit more resources onto this side, just to make sure that the defenses are fully built on both sides. But as you can see, it's a bit too late, so some of the enemies are getting through, because there's a little bit lax there. And this wave is showing some of the variety of the modifiers that the enemies can have. So you'll see that these enemies have a defensive shield, which means that the regular towers just aren't doing enough damage to them. So the player does have special abilities to help with this. So for example, now you can see that they're dancing, and it creates this special effect around them that basically destroys the enemy's shields and makes them back to being as weak as they previously were. So again, the manager does try to help with this, but as you're playing, you will start recognizing these patterns and things that the enemies have that will make them a bit more difficult as you're playing. And another example is so for this wave, the creeps that you've seen before, the big hulking tank guys, are now fire-based. So what this means is that any of your towers that emit fire, like the flamethrower towers, they will actually now heal these enemies rather than hurt them. So one way you could go about this is taking those towers down to make sure that the enemies don't get healed, or making sure that they are killed before they get to that point, so they don't get healed. So there's a few different ways that you can get around it, but one thing is to be sure is that your existing strategy will just need to be adapted depending on the types of waves and creeps that you're up against. So still the defenses are not quite up to scratch, because a few of them are getting through. But again, you'll see this dancing ability where you dance on the spot, and your special ability here is that you're able to slow the creeps down. So it's still not quite as effective, but if you had done this a bit earlier, you could have slowed them down before they got to that point and taken a bit more damage. And as we're now on the final wave, the creeps that you're up against are a bit tricky, because they will pick up the notes that are left around, and once they pick those up, it will give them a speed boost, and they can just run straight to the end without taking any damage. So again, it's the kind of thing where you really need to modify your strategy based on learning what types of enemies you're going to be up against. And that's the end of the demo level. So you'll get a few notifications about your score and time and how much damage the algorithm took, your highest combo and things like that, so that you can try and beat your score for the next time. Okay, so we're just about running out of time. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen so far. I just would like to say thank you to the London Games Festival for featuring Rhyhm Towers. It means a lot to me. If you would like to find out more about the game, please check out rhythmtowers.com or follow @Rhyhm Towers on all the social media platforms. And also check out our Discord server, where you can request some Steam keys to play early versions of the game as soon as they become available. Thank you very much.